Where did transgender ideology originate?
Well, it kind of depends on how far back you want to trace it. You could trace it, yeah, right. You could trace it all the way back to the Garden of Eden, I suppose, if you wanted to, the fall of man. But it really, what we consider, the modern gender ideology, the modern transgenderism movement, goes back to the mid 20th century to guys like John Money, Alfred Kinsey. I mean, really, John Money is kind of the father of gender ideology, and he was one of the first to get this idea that and to promote this idea that there's a distinction between sex and gender. And that was a really key move, is to draw this line of delineation between your sex, what we call your biological sex, which of course is redundant. You don't need to say that. Sex is biological, and your gender, which is, the way he looked at it, it's just how you present yourself in the world. And there's this distinction between the two. And it was very key to draw this distinction. But then what you notice as time goes on and this stuff becomes more mainstream, that this distinction between sex and gender was then collapsed. And that happened somewhat recently. This is something you started to notice around 2013, 14, 15. They started to collapse this distinction, where now the trans activists were saying that, well, actually, a quote unquote trans woman is not just kind of performing femininity, is not just identifying as a woman, but actually is a woman. So that there's no actual distinction, the trans activists would say, between a trans woman and a woman. They're one and the same. So and this is the kind of sleight of hand trick that you find with leftists generally, but in particular with trans activists. Everything's a sleight of hand. They make an argument and they'll never follow it to its logical conclusion because they can't. And so everything they do, they're just trying to set the stage for the next thing.
And so it seems as if, though, that the trans movement hit an acceleration point in the early 2010s, 12, 13, 14, with the proliferation of social media on our kids' smartphones, but also where the medical industry seemed to realize that there were tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to be made, coupled with actual transgender ideological zealots. Can you explain all these different buckets? There's the social media component, which is the social contagion. Then there's the medical industry that sees these kids as annuities. But then there's also like firm religious believers in transgender ideology that think that it's almost a Gnostic spirituality. Can you speak to the Gnostic spiritualities part of it?
Yeah, I think, and those are your zealots, as you say. I think that they're very much in the minority. I think for most, if we ask ourselves why this idea gained the foothold in our culture that it did, it was able to do that through our institutions, through the institution of medicine, through our school system, through the mental health, so-called mental health professionals. And most of them, once again, didn't really believe that any of this was actually true. I mean, did they actually believe that a biological male was in any sense really a woman? No, but for them, there was a lot of money in it, a lot of money, and that's something that came on very quickly. And there was just this rush, this millions and millions and millions of dollars all of a sudden in this industry. So I don't think they actually believed it, but you did have the true believers, and for them, now they can't talk about the issue coherently. Even they can't really explain. As we know, they can't explain what a woman is. When they say a trans woman is a woman, if you just ask them, well, what do you mean by that? I find that to be a really powerful question in general. It's like, well, okay, that's your statement. That's what you're saying. That's your claim. What do you mean? Can you just talk about that for a little bit more? Can you give me a few sentences about that? And they can't do it. And the reason they can't do it is because it is purely a matter of faith. It's a kind of, and they don't want to say this because they want to cloak it in science, but what they actually think is that it's spiritual. What they actually believe, if they're willing to say it, is that that a trans woman is a man who has the soul of a woman.
Bingo.
That's what they believe.
That's right.
But they won't say that because now they've admitted that they're on religious grounds. And that's also an argument they don't want to have, because then I could say, well, okay, let's talk about that. A trans woman is a man with the soul of a woman. Where did he get the soul from? I mean, where does he come from? Where's his soul from? And the answer is, right now, well, now we've introduced God into the equation, and that's a big problem for the trans activists, because then the question is, so what happened? Was there some sort of error on the celestial assembly line where God accidentally put the wrong soul into this body? Is God making mistakes? And of course, that's not a claim they want to make either.
And so to go even further, I hope you guys internalize what Matt just said. There's more profundity in that couple-minute explanation. Almost anything you'll hear in American seminaries. There's an old religious belief of something called Gnosticism. It is a heresy. Lucas talks about it a lot. And essentially, it's a belief. Gnosis, by the way, is the Greek word for mind. It's a belief that the mind and the body and the soul are all kind of separate pieces. We as Christians completely reject this, for the record. We believe that the body and the soul are actually really connected. That's why in the scriptures it says that our bodies will be resurrected again, that our bodies actually have very physical meaning, that it says your body is the temple of the Lord's in 1 Corinthians. That this Gnostic belief, though, is that since that you have a soul that is separate than your body, then you can kind of be something that you physically or even independently or objectively observe that you are not. So you could even be an animal. And you guys laugh. I'm going to tell you a real example. Donners Grove South High School, I think I got this correct. In the middle school, the junior high, in the bathroom, they have accommodations for kids to be able to use like kitty litter. I'm not kidding, because the girls are identifying as cats. That is an old Gnostic belief, by the way, of people that would say that I'm just a reincarnated animal. And yeah, it's a form of paganism, Hinduism. Again, this is nothing new. Again, you know what changed all this? Christianity changed all this. We're the first religion to come through and say, no, there's one God, it's Yahweh, Jehovah. This polytheism is a bunch of garbage, right? So anyway, Matt, can you riff?
I just want to add to that, because I think that one of the ways that this Gnosticism took hold is that you had a lot of Christians who don't understand their own faith and don't know how to talk about it. And so for example, you'll hear, and this is a quote you'll see, I've seen circulating on social media for years and years, and I think that it's often falsely attributed to C.S. Lewis, sometimes G.K. Chesterton. And the quote is something like, I don't have a soul. I am a soul. I have a body. That's the quote that you see sometimes. And this is not something that C.S. Lewis would never say something that stupid. You hear this from Christians sometimes, but no, that's not correct. It's not that you are a soul and you have a body. You are your body and your soul. There's a unity of the two. You can't separate the two. So we tend to think of it like my body is some kind of receptacle or a vehicle, that my soul is just kind of driving around and pulling the levers inside my body. That's not it. That's not it at all. What I am, what you see, my body is who I am, and my soul is in a mysterious way inextricably linked with my body. It's part of who I am. And this is one of the reasons why when we go to the trans activists, now they don't like to talk about souls, even though that is what they believe, as we've covered. What they will say, though, and this is kind of their way of saying soul, they'll say, well, sometimes you have a man that has a woman's brain. And they'll start pointing to all these studies that allegedly show that some men have the brains of women. And this is why I don't really care about studies. I'm not a big fan of studies. Most of the time, I know we want to sound like we're smart, and so somebody brings up a study, we want to throw another study back at them, and you get in kind of a study food fight. Well, here's a study. I think, in my opinion, 95% of the time when someone brings up a study, they say, well, haven't you read this study? I say, no, I haven't read it. I know based on what you just said that it's totally bogus. I don't even need to read it. I don't need to read it. Any study that claims to show that a man has a woman's brain is completely bogus. I don't care if this study was funded with $50 million. They took 70 years. They had 10,000 people. Doesn't matter, because what's the definition of a man's brain? It is the brain that is inside the head of a man. That is, by definition, a man's brain.
how did they get so deep in our institutions, Matt? How did this happen, Matt? Is it as simple as, well, we were just asleep at the wheel, or is it something more than that?
I wish that I could say we were asleep at the wheel, because if you fall asleep at the wheel, it's not necessarily your fault. That's something that happens accidentally. I think it's worse than that. I think it was a deliberate choice. It was a surrender. It was a waving the white flag. And so to answer your question and to bring it to kind of the point of this great event, that I think, there are a lot of answers to the question of how it got this deep in our institutions, but to me, the number one answer is that there is one institution that is supposed to be there as the vanguard against this kind of evil, and that institution refused to do its job, and that is the church. Now, I can, again, think back to 2016, 2017, 2020, 2021, being out there kind of in the field on this issue, fighting this issue out, whether it's going to school board meetings or holding rallies or doing anything. For me, it's making a movie, just using whatever resources were at my disposal to fight back. And I would look to the left of me, look to the right of me, and what I noticed is that what was missing, which is that there were not a lot of Christian leaders standing there beside me. I was more likely to look over to my side and see a liberal feminist standing with me on this issue than a Christian pastor. And not only that, but it was in fact worse, that very often, if a Christian pastor were to say anything to me or about me in relation to this issue, it was to condemn me for being too rude, for being too mean. They didn't like the way that I approached it. And my answer to them was always, okay, you don't like my approach. What's your alternative? Because your approach is nothing. Your approach is to say nothing at all. And I agree with something you said, Charlie, earlier about, we talk about the woke churches that have the rainbow flags and everything outside, and that's a big problem. That is an issue. If you have a rainbow in your church, it better be a part of some art display that references Noah's Ark. The rainbow flag is anathema. It is heresy. And any church that flies it, I should say it's a church, but not for the Christian religion. So there's those kinds of churches, and that's not real. Those are not real Christian churches. The bigger problem has been for a long time, the kind of milquetoast, lukewarm, I don't really want to get involved. And so you sit in these churches and you're not going to hear anything necessarily objectionable. You're not going to hear anything said that's wrong. Everything said is maybe true, but it's what's not being said. And to reference something that C.S. Lewis actually talked about, I think in Screw Tape Letters, he talks about it in multiple works of his, how we're on a spiritual battleground, we're on a spiritual battlefield, and when you go to church, you've got these are your soldiers, right, who are coming in after being out on the battlefield for the last 6 days, and they're bruised and they're broken and they're beaten, and this is where they're supposed to hear their marching orders. This is like, let's regroup. Let's talk about our battle plan, okay? That's what it should feel like when you're in church. And so often, at least in my experience, and I've been going to church for 38 years, so often it doesn't feel like that. It feels like maybe a meeting with the HR representative at a Fortune 500 company, or like I'm in middle school talking to my guidance counselor again. It doesn't feel like this is someone, the pastor, and there are exceptions to this, but so often it doesn't feel like the pastor is even living in the same reality as the rest of us, right? And so to go back to the trans thing, this was going on for years, and I would hear, I'm not a pastor, I'm not a church leader, but I would hear from these parents whose kids are being kidnapped by this ideology. His kids their minds are being stolen by this. I've heard the most gut-wrenching stories from parents who have lost their kids spiritually, mentally, and sometimes physically. I mean, their kids fall victim to this, and 2 or 3 years later, their kids are gone. And you have these parents that are struggling with this for years and years, and so many of them are going to churches and never once hearing it even referenced. It's like it doesn't exist. And so I'm sitting in these churches and I'm thinking, do you not realize what's going on out there? Do you not understand what these people, what we're going through, what actually matters? I mean, now I'm just ranting, I could continue, but
Oh, it's great, keep going.
yeah, one of the most offensive, just in this vein here, one of them, and I've told this story before, one of the most offensive sermons I ever heard was years ago from a pastor, probably a decent guy. The sermon was about Toy Story, the movie Toy Story, if you guys are familiar. It was all about how, and it was a long sermon too. It was way too long, and it went on and on and on about the movie Toy Story and all the lessons we can learn from Toy Story, because there are songs in Toy Story about how we should be friends, and so this was kind of a sermon about the value of friendship and how Buzz Lightyear and Woody, they didn't like each other at first, but then they learned how to be friends by the end of it. And I'm sitting there, and I was a young parent at the time, 2 or 3 kids, and thinking about all the things that and I'm very familiar with Toy Story. I like the movie, actually, as far as kids' movies go. But of all the things that I am worried about, all the things that matter to me as a father, as a man, as an American, and you're sitting there talking about Toy Story. I mean, this is the kind of talk that I would expect a kindergarten teacher to give to their students when they're sitting on an alphabet rug drinking apple juice. And it's that, and that's one of the worst that I've heard, so it's not often that bad, but it's not the wokeness, it's that. It's just, it's nothing. That's nothing.
It's the sin of omission. It is the sin of silence. Is that when you are silent, you're actually saying everything. When you are silent, you are speaking to your congregation that what you are omitting doesn't matter. And that is, and so many pastors, unfortunately, will escape by, be like, well, I don't mention the controversial stuff, and so therefore I stay away from it. That's exactly what is wrong, is that you have to stand up and be counted. There is no middle ground. It's either you're a yes or you're a no on these very morally important issues. I have 2 questions, and I want to go one at a time. If a pastor in this audience, privately, a mom comes up to the pastor and says, Pastor, my 13-year-old is a girl who thinks she is a boy. How should a pastor in this audience deal with that?
Well, I'll start by saying what even the left would say, but they don't mean it, which is the way you respond to that is by loving your daughter. You love her. You never stop loving your child. But what that means is that you will never surrender her to this madness. You will just never do it. They're going to say they hate you. They're going to scream at you. They're going to want to lock themselves in a room. And you got to go through that. But you never give into it. You never give into the lie that the fact that you've made your daughter and your child upset means that you don't love them or you're not loving them the right way. No, in this case, the fact that they're upset means that you are loving them. It means that this is exactly how you should be responding. On a more practical level, by the way, if your child is actually struggling with this, again, they're going to hate you for this, and that's fine. But you got to look at what their influences are. And most likely, if you got a 13-year-old daughter or son who's experimenting now with this idea that he's trapped in the wrong body, almost certainly he's got the smartphone and he's on social media. Take the phone away, okay? It's not just, oh, we're gonna limit the amount of time you spend on it. Take it away. I got 6 kids. None of my kids have this technology. We have one, my wife and I have phones. We have one other screen in the house. It is our family TV that's in a public area in the house. There's no doors. We don't have any screens for kids in a room where a door can be shut. We don't have that. So you can watch TV. We're going to know exactly what you're watching. And it's going to be in a place where we can hear it anywhere in the house where we go. So you can't even change the channel and try to sneak something past us. And certainly, we are not giving them unfettered access to the internet. And so take that away from your child. Look at who their friend groups are. And hopefully that will be enough. And then you might have to resort to even extreme measures or measures that might seem extreme. If they're in public school, you might have to think about, do we have to pull them out of school? Do we have to homeschool? It sounds crazy and unworkable. It's not. I do it. You can do it. You're just doing anything that is necessary to protect them from this madness.
And I'll add to that, every pastor here, I encourage you to buy Dr. Miriam Grossman's book, Lost in Trans Nation. She's an actual clinician. She's not just a theoretical thinker about this. She deals and treats kids with gender dysphoria. Understand, up until recently, we had a whole treatment protocol for this, which was very simple. It's called watchful waiting. We believed that puberty was the solution, not the problem. And usually kids, like 99% of the time, they grow out of this thing. And understand this. Here's some facts about transgender ideology when it comes to young people. 75% are girls. 75%. Why does that matter? Well, girls are far more likely to get involved in social contagions, whether it be cutting practices, whether it be dressing to be able to accommodate their peers, social stigmas. They're far more likely to be pressured by cliques or social stigmas. Young ladies are in a very difficult time of their life at 12, 13, 14 years old, and the trans ideology swoops into them. Fact number two, there's almost, Matt would know this even better than I would, but according to Dr. Miriam Grossman, she's almost never seen a case of a kid that falls victim of transgender ideology that does not also have autism or other underlying neurodivergent type disorders. This is very important, everybody. So if you have a kid with autism, it's a higher likelihood that they're going to be able to fall victim to the transgender social contagion. Number three, which is very important, if you are a pastor, you need to get on your hands and knees and pull every possible thing to prevent a parent from sending that kid to a medical doctor. I don't care if it's been their pediatrician since they were 6 months old. 99% of them are being trained in bad medieval witchcraft science that says that they should go on hormone blockers. They could be the best meaning kids possible. The guidelines of the American Pediatric Association, it will take your breath. Am I right on this, Matt?
Absolutely.
It will take your breath away. Because the mom will say, oh, well, my daughter's 13, but we're going to go see our pediatrician. She has a whole plan. The goal will be hormone blockers and a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist will immediately say, Lupron, intervention, surgery, eventually no breast by the age of 16. Not an exaggeration. And that pediatrician is schooled to believe that it is a body disorder when it is a brain disorder. The final point I'll make is this, is that first interaction, Dr. Miriam Grossman crushes it in her book. That first interaction means so much. You need to tell the parent this, that you need to ask your daughter, it's most likely a daughter, a ton of questions. Really, where'd you hear about this? When did you start thinking that? Be infinitely curious about the condition. The more curious you are about the condition, all of a sudden, all the defenses start to go down. All of a sudden, it feels, okay, you're loving them. You're learning, oh, really? Are any of your friends thinking that way?
One thing, and Dr. Miriam Grossman is absolutely fantastic, and she's also in our film, What is a Woman? One thing I would add to that is, before you get to that point where your daughter comes to you at the age of 13 and says, I think I'm a boy, how do we avoid getting to that point? Because there's the question of, well, what do you do when that happens? And Miriam Grossman has a lot of great advice on that. How do we stop that from happening if we can? And we've already gone over some of it. Some of it is pretty simple, though difficult, taking away the phones, taking away these influences. But at kind of a deeper level, and you won't be able to do this perfectly, but you want your children to stay attached to you. And I know we use that word attached, and it sounds like I'm saying, well, you want to be a helicopter parent. You don't want your kids to be able to, function in the world. That's not what I'm saying. You want to keep that attachment, that bond with your child, so that they're orienting themselves to the world based on you, so that they're looking at you as the adult, as the parent, to figure out how they're supposed to operate in the world. And that used to be kind of a given. I mean, for most of human history, children would orient themselves to the world by looking at their parents, and then also looking at their grandparents, looking at their elders. And that's how they'd figure out how to just be in the world, how to be a person, how to be an adult, how to be a man or a woman. And what ends up happening in the era of public school, and especially now with social media, is that that bond is severed, and it's severed sometimes very, very early. And the kids start orienting themselves to the world by looking at their peers. And when that happens, now it's like they don't care what the parent thinks anymore. Now that they don't want to hear from the parent. They hate their parents. And we take that for granted. We say, oh, it's a teenage phase. They hate their parents. Every teenager goes through this. No, it's a phase now in modern society. It was not a phase back in 1832. It was not taken for granted that your 14-year-old daughter would hate you and want nothing to do with you. It happens now because our kids are living in a culture that does everything it can to rip them away from their parents and from the elders who love them and know them and care for them, and to put them into this confusing environment where they're learning about the world by looking to each other, looking to other people who are also confused. And so then they're just going around in circles, following each other. And so to whatever extent possible, to keep that bond with your kid, to keep them orienting based on you, I think is a big way to do it.
Sometimes, like in our church youth groups, we have a lot of kids coming in that are new, that we don't necessarily have a lot of influence on how they're parented, that have these transgender ideologies. Like we'll preach on the stuff often and frequently, but sometimes there's still this draw where the kids that have been raised in the sheltered homes are now kind of being negatively influenced, and they're listening to the new kids that are coming in. So I was wondering if you have a suggestion on how to welcome it in all the kids to be part of your youth group and teach them about Jesus when they're coming in with these wrong mindsets and ideologies that are sometimes contagious.
And do you have any communication with the parents? Are you able to talk to their parents at all?
Yeah, we're able to. Sometimes kids are coming and their parents aren't really churched and don't want to talk much. Like there's a few of them, but I think most of them we can talk to the parents.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is these are and maybe ministering a youth group, you're not in a position to do this, but a big part of the answer is that these are parents who need to be ministered to. These parents need a lot of help and a lot of spiritual guidance, because you're right that if they're coming to a youth group for what? I mean, how long is how often do they come?
Yeah, a couple hours.
A couple hours a week. There's only so much you can do, and if the parents aren't on board, or if they're confused, if they're scared, if they don't know what to do, then you're always going to be pushing against that. So the parents need to be ministered to. As for the kids, I mean, I think all you can do is provide an environment with moral and spiritual clarity, and that all you can do is just kind of plant these seeds and hope that they sprout into something in the future. You're probably not going to say something that makes one of these kids go, "Oh, you're right. This whole trans stuff is nonsense." They're not going to say that in the moment. But if you can provide this kind of clarity, that could be, and you might not see it in the moment, but down the line, I think it'll have that effect.
Thank you. This will be the last question. Then we were going to have Jensen close us out.
Yeah, I know most of these kids, 70% of them are coming from single parent or homes where there's no father in the home. How does the father factor? We know the father sets the physical DNA of the child and also the spiritual. How does that play into your statistics on these children that are easily transitioned into that lifestyle?
So I'd have to check out that number because it actually contradicts something that Dr. Grossman wrote about in her book. And I'm not saying you're wrong, but it's interesting because she actually says that the parents that will go as far as going to surgery are actually overly hyper-involved parents at times. In fact, Matt, I think you would agree that there's a hyper-involvement of parents. And let me tell you why, because I think you're right. I think there's two different categories. I think those that will see it all the way to youth surgery for minors versus those that are susceptible to trans ideology. And understand the emotional blackmail. Parents are blackmailed by these doctors where they will say, would you rather have an alive son than a dead daughter? And it puts them on a sequence of interventions. But Matt, do you want to mention that?
Yeah, I think you're right, exactly right about that. And to your point about the fatherless homes, that contributes to every societal problem that we have. There's no serious cultural issue or societal issue that we can talk about coherently without acknowledging the fact that so many kids are growing up in homes without fathers. And I talk about it all the time with so many other issues. It probably should be talked about more on this particular issue, as you point out, because one thing that I know as a father, and in particular with my sons, it's very obvious when you're a father of young boys that they are looking to you, like literally looking to you all the time, just to figure out what being a boy means. Like, what am I supposed to do as a boy? I have all this energy, all of this, all of this kind of masculine energy and everything, this aggressiveness. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know where I'm supposed to direct that. And that's why you need a father there to show them. It's not just telling them, but actually showing them how to apply that stuff. And I think if kids don't have that, they don't have both the father and the mother showing them, father showing you this is what it means to be a man, mother, this is what it means to be a woman, then a lot of this confusion arises.
Thank you. Guys, in closing here, I encourage my final marching order before I depart, because I know you guys are going to have a great couple days. Take some of this and bring it back to your churches. Take what you're hearing from Matt Walsh, even if it's like, hey guys, my sermon, let's play a 90-second clip of Matt Walsh on something. Matt, God bless you, man. Give it up for Matt Walsh, everybody. Thank you, guys.